Hello everyone, I'm Bable Jonathan. Welcome to this edition of The Inside on EQUINOXE Television. In this edition of the program, we're going to discuss a wide range of issues. We'll talk about the Back to School 2019-2020 academic year. We'll also talk about the fight against Operation Ghost Town and the lockdown imposed by separatist fighters in the two Anglophone regions of the Republic of Cameroon, the Northwest and the Southwest regions. And of course, we'll talk about government's strategy, and of course, this in regards to efforts to solve the Anglophone crisis. We'll also talk about the strike of lawyers who are protesting against the violation of human rights, notably the rights of Cameroonians. And we'll also take a look at the announced national dialogue. This is information that streamed into our newsroom following a meeting between the Prime Minister, Chief Dr. Joseph Dion-Gote, and some conveners of the Anglophone General Conference. In some few seconds, meet our guest. Our guest in this edition of the program is a former member of the Cameroon government, former minister in charge of special duties at the presidency of the Republic of Cameroon, former minister of forestry and wildlife. He is the director of the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement CPDM Academy, where young politicians are trained, and of course he is a member of the CPDM Central Committee. He is a senior political scientist, associate professor of political science at the International Relations Institute of Cameroon. Eric, Professor ELVIS NGOLE, you welcome to the program.
Thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Bable Jonathan. It's a great pleasure always to be on your prestigious plateau.
You started from very small beginnings, and then you move up through your career right up to senior member of the Cameroon government, the minister that you were for about 5 years, Minister of Forestry and Wildlife, after spending over 9 years at the presidency of the Republic as minister in charge of special duties. How did it go?
Well, it's good that you have that history, but it's also good to let your prestigious audience know that I'm the product of very humble beginnings. I'm the son of a coffee and cocoa farmer. My father was nothing but a farmer, you know. So I'm a product of very small beginnings, and I'm quite at ease being in humble situations, and I'm always humbled by. I'm always humbled anytime I move from one point to the other. Yes, you know, I had the opportunity and privilege to have gone to study in the United States for 12 years until I obtained a PhD in international relations, and I was privileged to have been recruited by the University of Yaoundé to teach at the International Relations Institute of Cameroon, from where again I was privileged to have been received the confidence of the president, who appointed me minister in charge of special duties and at the presidency of the Republic, and later on Minister of Forestry and Wildlife, and now as a member of the Central Committee I was once again appointed to be the coordinator of the Academy of the CPDM, where we again do the work of political training or political education of our militants. After all, as you know, it is the mission of the CPDM party to educate and to train the militants of the CPDM, who are the citizens of the Republic of Cameroon.
Was it easy for you to move from the very little beginnings to the top?
No, it wasn't difficult for me. It was that easy because, you know, from my beginnings, I was taught the values of humility. From my beginnings, I was taught the values of not being selfish, or not being boastful, or not being too excited, and to always look simple and be ordinary and feel at ease.
It was easy for you to move right to the top. It was, I presume, also easy for somebody like the President of the Republic, who got into government at a very young age and moved up to the ladder to become the President of the Republic. It was probably easy for many other government members today, those who are still on seat, and even the former members of government. But when you look at the situation of Cameroonians today, with the hundreds who are graduating from schools, higher institutions of learning, many of them finding it very difficult, many of them not being able to pick a job, not being able to create a job, many of them running into motorbike riding and some kind of menial jobs and so on. What do you think about that?
No, you know, I mean, it's good that you bring up that point. And as a university don, and as a university lecturer, I mean, I'm one of those who lives with and sees and experiences the plight of these young people who have left the universities. But as a teacher and as someone who came from humble beginnings, my advice always in our conversations with the young people, in all situations, is always that as a young person, what keeps you going is that you have the energy, you have the luck and the blessing to be young, and the greatest hope for you is that there is a state of which you are a part, and whose duty is to protect you, to mold you, and to make you into a successful adult. I'm an example of that. I was lucky to have left the university and appointed into the government by a head of state and placed at the presidency of the Republic, where I was lucky to be under a great teacher and a great model, the president himself. So I learned a lot, and because of that experience, my advice to young people is that, yes, as you've just said, it's difficult for them. But again, this situation of young people having difficulty moving from the university, for example, into the job market is not exclusive to Cameroon. It's not a Cameroonian specificity. As you know, in the age of globalization, this problem of youth pressure and the difficulties of youth to move from the university into the job market is worldwide. It's a global situation.
The President of the Republic said young people should be daring, they should be creative.
Exactly.
But many of them, especially those who are finding it difficult to be daring and to be creative, yes, and to make ends meet, are accusing the government authorities of having failed in their duties.
No, that's where the mistake lies. Whenever you are in difficult situations or in a difficulty, as a young person, we were all young persons, and whenever you are in your youth, you, because of the difficulty you face, you begin straight away by pointing and accusing finger at who and at what? At the state. Remember I said, the luck about being a youth is that you have a state whose mission is to mold you, to orient you, and to make you into a successful citizen, and whose mission it is also to protect you from hurting yourself, from being hurt, from being desperate, from losing your life, and so forth and so on. So, but once you begin as a youth by accusing that very state, the alternative is what? There's no other state that you've got of which you can say, I'm a part. Those youth who think that it's easy to solve the problem by migrating, well, you know all the problems that are attendant to migration.
But those accusations are often triggered by the absence of the protection which you're talking about, the absence of efforts to ensure the well-being of the people, the absence of, all the provisions that's supposed to come from that state?
No, those who perceive or who conclude that there's an absence of protection, I think that it's either because they've either they have developed either some anger or some sort of alienation. It's an error they are making, and as a university done, someone who teaches young people, I advise them when I teach them, and I advise them when we meet in the streets or elsewhere, that don't lose hope, because that's the worst thing you can do. Don't become alienated from your state. The best hope you've got, the best guarantee that a youth has got on this earth is never to alienate himself or herself from the state, because the state is God on earth. The state's raison d'etre is to protect, to mold, and to give hope and to give a future. This is what the state is all about. And once you alienate yourself because of the difficulties of God, or someone influences you, and you start pointing accusing fingers at that state, without that state you are nothing. Because I know the phenomenon of statelessness. Statelessness is the worst thing that can happen to any human being. You should avoid that.
And I will not want us to leave without mentioning the responsibility of the young people also. We've heard the government authorities often saying that government can't provide jobs for everybody, but the young people,
but the government creates the conditions,
have their responsibilities.
Indeed, the youths have the responsibilities to prepare themselves for being the adults of tomorrow.
While the government also plays its role of creating the enabling environment.
But if the children, that's where there's another problem. Do that, they should submit themselves to being orientated very well by the state, protected by the state, and you'll discover that as an adult, you'll be fine.
But that orientation which you're talking about, the enabling environment and so on, that's where there's yet another problem. We've been hearing opposition politicians, civil society leaders, and other persons saying categorically that the government of President Paul Biya has failed as far as creating an enabling environment, working for the well-being of the people is concerned. That's why the unemployment has continued rising, and many other issues.
Well, I also follow those criticisms of the opposition in Cameroon, and not being in the opposition and not working for the opposition. It's unfortunate because as a teacher of political science and a student of political science, because as a teacher you also learn, one of the concerns I've got about the politics in Cameroon is that some of our opposition leaders and some of our opposition parties, rather than play the classical role that political parties are supposed to play. And again, as I've told you, I taught courses in political parties in Africa for many years at the Catholic University of Central Africa and in other places. The greatest mistake that political parties in Cameroon are making, particularly those of the opposition, is that some political parties, I think, are playing what you call the politics of ostrich politics. And they don't quite understand that a political party is not an alternative to the state. A political party doesn't have the attributes of legitimacy and legality to challenge the state. The state, I was going to answer your question. Those political parties, because they are in the position, who think that the best way they can get to power, which is the primary goal of an opposition party, is to challenge the state, is to destroy the state, is to point accusing fingers to the state, is to blackmail the state. They are in error. They are making a mistake.
As a senior political scientist, do you think that the policies of the government of Cameroon are delivering the goods, are providing that needed security and well-being for Cameroonians?
Of course. I mean that's a question that's so easy to answer. Mr. Babila Jonathan, let us be scientific, because I am from the scientific community. Let us not be, when we are emotional or passionate, we lose sight of the objective. You've asked a very good question. Does the state in Cameroon provide they all deliver the services and the goods as it's supposed to? Of course, the answer is very simple. Yes. Why do I say yes, Mr. Babila Jonathan? We are about what?
But employment has continued rising.
Yes, with them, you're looking at only one issue. The state is not. The state is not judged by one issue.
Hardship and poverty.
I agree with you.
Lack of water, electricity, even in the political capital.
Fine, I agree. I mean, there's no doubt. I will not deny that with you. But you don't judge the state by looking at one issue. This is, politics is not based on single issues. The state is, as I've said, is an ensemble of that is the reflection of all the people and whatever all the people stand for. The state is everything you can imagine about the land, the people, the institutions, the culture, the mindsets, the dreams, the customs, the traditions. This is what the state is. And when you imagine that 25 million Cameroonians for almost 60 years are still on the same territory, they are still following and subject to the same institutions.
But many of them living in very difficult conditions, living in places with no roads, bad roads and so on.
That's fine. I understand that. I cannot deny that there are bad roads. But again, the state of Cameroon, you should give credit where credit is due, is doing the best it can out of the 55 countries in Africa. The state of Cameroon is doing quite a good job. It is the leader in the Central African sub-region, meaning there is no other country among the 6 countries in the Central African sub-region that can say is doing better than Cameroon in many respects. But if you take issue by issue, road, water, electricity, and you want to judge the state by that, it's a myopic or a very limited way of looking at the state.
We have taken more time than previewed on this. Besides these problems, there is a bigger problem that is affecting Cameroon today, socio-political and security crisis affecting 2 regions of the country, even though we also have the security challenges in the far north, in the Adamawa, and even in the east region. But in the northwest region of the country, for 3 years today, many pupils, many students have not gone to school. Many schools have remained closed until today. We are now talking about the 2019-2020 academic year, and I saw you on the field with other elites of the Coupe Maninguba division trying to push for an effective back to school. But it's not yet the case. The situation remains quite disturbing. Many villages, many schools have remained dead till today. Hundreds of thousands of young Cameroonians not going to school. When you look at this picture as an elite and as a political scientist, a senior statesman that you are, what do you think about the future of these 2 regions?
You're referring to the 2 regions, the northwest and the southwest. And out of the 10 regions we've got in Cameroon, as a citizen of Cameroon, in my patriotism, and as a teacher of political science, and militant of conviction of the CPDM, which is the majority party in power, I feel particularly touched and very sad, or even saddened by this situation which has lasted for more than 3 years, especially with regard to the security of people, with regard to the education of the children, with regard to the destruction of property, the destruction of the economy, and the dislocation of social life, and so forth and so on. It's really depressing, and I cannot lie to you that those of us who, in spite of how depressing this situation is, try to make sure in our private lives and in our public lives we try to rise above the bad situation. I understand that it's not easy, but where is the hope? The hope is that the state of Cameroon, under the leadership of the head of state, is determined to take on this problem, to find a solution to the problems. And we are seeing, yes, you know, to find solutions to the problem, there's no magic. Policy making, policy implementation, there's nothing magical about it. And there's nothing emotional about these things. We are human beings, we live in a real human society. And this problem that you've raised, the socio-political problems in the Northwest and the Southwest, and the crisis that has erupted, has had terrible consequences. I mean, we don't need to enumerate these consequences.
And the consequences will be far more reaching with regards to the future of the young people who are not going to school today.
Exactly, not only the future of the young people as far as their education is concerned, but the future of life, human life. Because every day, every here and there, people are killed after being tortured and kidnapped, and so forth and so on. It's not good. And we, as human beings of English expression, in a Cameroon that is bicultural, multilingual, multicultural, we have a citizen duty. We have a patriotic duty to do our best to see how we can accompany the state to find solutions, because the state is determined to find solutions, has begun even. I can enumerate all the things that the state has done to be able to find solutions, all the policy measures to try to reform the judiciary, all the policy measures to try to reform the higher education sector.
We'll come to
the institutional reforms.
We'll elaborate a little more on the strategy of government in solving the crisis later in the program. But looking at the picture of schools today in those two regions, one would think that government has failed in making sure that things return to normalcy as far as education is concerned in those two regions.
The government is succeeding. Those who perceive and make the claim that the government has failed, I think they are being of bad faith, or they're joking, because look, take the population of the
government
Northwest. I want to be very, very scientific and statistical.
Government is said to have lost control of several parts of the two Anglophone regions. Which
No,
are now
how could anybody say government has lost control when you say somebody has lost control? It means that the state is absent, the state is nowhere, and that nothing functions. But between you and I, take the population of the Northwest and Southwest, it's about what? 3 million, 3.5 million, or okay, you can round it up to 4 million, right? Based on the statistics that we read about every day. The bulk of that 4 million population, it's still in the Northwest and Southwest regions, under the protection of the state, in spite of the challenges that have been raised by those who have taken up arms. That tells you that the majority population of the Northwest and Southwest is still in the Northwest and Southwest, under the fear and so forth, because of those who have taken up arms. That already tells you that the state is successful, because the Northwest and Southwest still has the bulk of its population. Secondly, the institutions of the state, the laws of the states of Cameroon are still functioning in the Northwest and the Southwest. The administration, the security services, and other services. They are functioning, unless you want to say they don't exist anymore. They are. Whether you take is the governors or the SDOs or the DOs, the traditional leaders, and so forth and so on, they are functioning. The only section where there are problems is the educational sector, because education has to do with what? Providing the infrastructure and the means and the facilities for young people to be able to go and acquire education. What has happened in the last 3 years is that these young men who have taken up arms illegally, illegitimately, against the state and against their own very people, they have introduced fear. They have terrorized the people. And the people, as human beings, having been terrorized, they have been gripped by fear. And of course, when adults and children are gripped by fear, of course, fear, it becomes as if they've caught malaria. And it's not easy. And all this, among the things the state has done in the last 3 years, is to try to remove that fear factor, to provide the right security mechanisms, and so forth and so on. So, without absconding, without failing, without giving up.
Government is trying to take away the fear factor on the population.
Sure.
We saw some of you on the field.
Yes.
Elites, administrative officials, and political leaders, notably of the CPDM political party, encouraging the parents to brave the odds, to overcome the fear and go to school. But many of the parents think that it's a suicide mission, looking at the gun battles between the separatists and the military. Their children could be caught in between.
Yeah, we understand the parents. I mean, we are not naive, because after all, we ourselves are parents. We have been children too. It's understandable after 3 years of being subjected to the terror of armed gangs, drugs, and so forth and so on, against an innocent population. And I've always said, and I'm sure those who have followed me know this, I'm one of those who believes that Anglophones are bona fide Cameroonians who have integrity and who believe in the Cameroon idea and believe in a Cameroon of oneness as one family, one nation. We are proud to be Cameroonians as Anglophones. But these young men who have taken up arms against their people, against their nation, luckily, and thanks to some of them, they have begun to understand that this is wrong and they are changing. We should give credit to those young men who have seen that it's wrong to take up arms, and they've given up arms and they're changing.
What's your take on the fight against Operation Ghost Town and lockdown, the lockdown imposed by separatists in the 2 Anglophone regions? We saw the government delegate of Kumba, the Kumba City Council, and the other administrative authorities, the mayor of Boya and so on, sealing some shops and compelling the people to open their shops despite the risk of having their shop being burned down or being attacked and so on and so forth.
Ghost towns and lockdowns are useless, they are bad, they are illegal, and they bring about unnecessary suffering and dislocations and misery. And those who believe in this sort of phenomena and seek to or do implement these sorts of phenomena are really not helping democracy, and they are not helping their country.
Are the measures being taken by the administrative and municipal authorities on the ground to counter this issue of ghost town and lockdown appropriate measures, sealing of shops and compelling traders to open their shops and so on?
You know, municipal authorities, they have local powers. Don't forget that we are in a decentralized sort of state in which local authorities, maybe the mayors, who have not yet got regions, have the local authority and powers to carry out the local administration and local development. So as far as I'm concerned, they are doing what they are, under the Constitution, their powers permit them to do. How well they are succeeding, that's a different matter. The best way to get what you want done to be done is not to become ghost and transform everybody into ghost.
All right, Prof, we're going
to lock yourself down.
We're going to take a look at what the newspapers reported this week. The Voice reports that the lockdown imposed by separatists in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon is claiming more lives in Bamenda. 6 people killed, homes burnt down in the course of a military raid back to school 2019-2020 in the northwest and southwest regions is qualified by the Post-Weekender as a tale of boycott, gun battles and political manipulations, and the Sun highlights the hope anxiety and uncertainty that characterize school resumption in the crisis-hit northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. According to Legideon, there is a possibility that the life jail sentence slammed on Sisiku, Ayuk Tabe and other Anglophone leaders will be lifted as the Yaoundé Military Court acknowledges reception of the appeal filed by lawyers of the detainees. The lawyers have continued decrying the violation of the rights of their clients and what they call a travesty of justice, and it is for these reasons, for unprofessional treatment and administrative interference in judicial procedures, that lawyers of the Cameroon Bar Association are to go on strike September 16, as reported by the Post, The Star and The Advocate. Government is reported by the Guardian Post to be pleading on the Bar Association to abandon the strike option, but the latter is unbending. In other news, the Guardian Post projects Boyeme Ekema Patrick Esunge as an anti-ghost town crusader who is intensifying efforts to kick the ghost out of his municipality. The Advocate reports that elites of Bakingili in the southwest region of Cameroon are pleading on President Paul Biya to evacuate former Prime Minister Chief Inoni Ephraim, detained in the Konengi maximum security prison in Yaoundé. The Star says why President Biya ought to authorize Inoni's evacuation. You're welcome back. Professor ELVIS NGOLE, former member of the Cameroon government and political scientist. It's been concluded within the ranks of the opposition and civil society organizations, and of course out of the country, even international NGOs, that government is bent on implementing a military strategy to solve the Anglophone crisis. What do you think about this military strategy that is set to be implemented by government to solve this problem?
Now, in all humility, in all honesty, those who make the statement that government is bent on implementing a military strategy to solve the problem, I think that they are blackbailing the government. And I think they are wrong. And it's good to, and maybe it's bad faith, it's good to be honest, and it's good to, we have difficulties, there's no doubt. But from what we know, as a matter of fact, because it's a matter of public record, that the head of state, the chief executive, the president of the republic, and his government have said publicly that they want to solve the Anglophone crisis through the method of dialogue. And that dialogue has been ongoing since when this crisis first emerged in the late 2016 with the teachers and the lawyers. The government took its time and began a dialogue. We all know what that dialogue went through. The teachers were able to be satisfied through that dialogue. The lawyers were able to be satisfied through that dialogue. Of course, dialogue is not a one-day thing. It's a process. It continues. And the head of state has said again and again that his preferred policy option is dialogue. And he has continued with that dialogue.
But for 3 years down memory lane, since the crisis started in 2016, we have seen soldiers on the ground in the northwest and southwest regions of the country flogging lawyers.
No, let me get to that.
We have seen soldiers flogging teachers.
No,
and many other things. And we heard the president of the republic said, I'm asking you separatists to drop your guns and come out of the bushes. And if you don't do so, the military will be instructed to neutralize you. And we have seen the deployment, the heavy deployment of military forces on the ground. The military, which is said to be a force that is meant to fight foreign invasion, foreign enemies. These are the elements that those who are saying that the president is bent on a military option, these are the points that have been...
Well, I think they are quick to jump at that conclusion, and I think it's good for them to try to be a little bit of good faith and honesty, because they're looking at things, they talk in half-truths. The full truth of the matter is that the President of the Republic is the head of state, legal, legitimate, constitutional. And in the capacity as head of state, in his capacity as head of state, and even on oath, because you were present on November 6 when he took the oath of office, he reiterated again his option. The option is dialogue within a Republican framework, and he is open to dialogue with everyone. As long as they are Cameroonians, there's nothing wrong with that, because you don't dialogue with outsiders when you have an internal national crisis. And he has kept so. But see, in dialoguing, that means we must be citizens that are patriotic. That means we must be willing to be open to one another. That means we should not seek to kill one another. That means that we should seek to construct the Cameroon of tomorrow, which is for all of us. This is the president's policy option, which he has not reneged from. Now, you asked about the military option. Look, Mr. Babila Jonathan, it's good for us as Cameroonians to understand one thing. Cameroon is not an island, and politics did not begin in Cameroon, and it will not end in Cameroon. What obtains in Cameroon has happened in France, in Britain, in America, in any country, in the 55 countries that Africa has. There's nothing new here. Mr. Babila Jonathan, there is no state on earth which functions and whose organizational form does not include the military component. The military, meaning the defense and security forces, are a constitutional, statutory, organic component of the state, of any state. It doesn't matter whether you're European, American, or Africa, it's the same thing. And at any time that the state functions in all its components, with all its components, and that includes the security and defense forces, meaning the military. At any given moment, when problems are raised that demand the security intervention or security input, the state, in trying to take on the problem, will do what it takes. If the problem needs educators, the state will use its educational arms. If the problem has to do with health, the state will use its health arm. If it has to do with security, it will use its security forces and so forth. As you know, the Anglophone crisis has a security component where all of us know. People are killed. People are kidnapped. People are tortured. When this happens, the state, of course, has to intervene. And when the state intervenes, even if politically, socially, economically, the state carries out certain policy objectives, the state does not leave behind its military component as long as the problem that is presented has a security component. You cannot have people who are being killed, children are being killed, houses are being destroyed, hospitals are being burned, and so forth and so on. People are being tortured, and you expect that the state should, in its attempt to solve the problem, it should make as if the military or security component doesn't exist. There is no state without the security and defense component. And so the fact that the security component or the defense component, or what you call the military, is there does not mean that that is the option the state has taken. No, because the head of state has continued to insist, and his government has continued to insist, that dialogue is, within its Republican form, is his preferred option. I remember following the president that his preferred policy option is dialogue which has a Republican bound, meaning that it is legal, it is constitutional, it is legitimate. Dialogue. But that does not mean that if you have dialogue and there's a security problem, that the state doesn't do that. The state is, there is no state that is complete in its organization, in its functioning, in its conception even, in its form, without a security component. As long as there are security problems, the security services will always be there. In the case of the Anglophone crisis, how else, even though we are trying to get dialogue, because we follow and support the head of state to solve the problem, you cannot pretend that those who are dying for nothing. People, you have to stop people dying. Teachers don't stop people dying. The doctors don't stop people dying. It is the military and security forces that can, in their input, prevent or dissuade or persuade people who are carrying out arms against people by killing other people. But that does not mean that that is the option or that is the solution. No, the military intervention or input is not the policy solution. The state's policy solution is political, because the problem is political, and the president has stated already that dialogue is the way he's going to do it. And he began that dialogue as far back as 2016.
So the military is intervening within the context of the military, the security component.
But the political problem which has been raised is there, and the head of state is taking it on.
The option of dialogue.
Policy reforms through the option of dialogue, Republican dialogue. But you cannot have Republican dialogue when people are there shooting at people in Dop or in Boya or in Wum or in Mbonge, Kondotiti or in Nguti. No, you need, when you have dialogue.
Some of those atrocities are also attributed to the military, accusations constantly rejected by the authorities that be.
But we should also say that the military authorities have tried to do their best to discipline its elements when they found out that they are doing something wrong. Because there's military law now, there's military justice, don't forget.
Now, according to you, the government has chosen the option of dialogue.
Yes,
dialogue
and it's still on the table.
Everything except secession. Dialogue on with everybody except the separatists. But those are the people who are more concerned with the problem, the major problem, which is the threats on the unity of the country. So if you decide to dialogue, but you don't dialogue with the people who are posing the real problem, I don't know if, as a political scientist, that is a wise decision.
I think we've had a chance to answer that question before. See, when there is dialogue, the dialogue is within a nation, amongst the people, the subject, the citizens of the nation. All dialogue has territorial limits, political limits, legal limits, constitutional limits. Dialogue is not something done by birds. Citizens are not birds. And a state is not a jungle. A state is an organized quantity, an organized ensemble, an organized personality, which is backed by law, constitution, customs, norms, and so forth. It's a Republican dialogue. That means citizens talking with themselves within the framework of the institutions and their laws and the authorities. In this case, we are here looking at a phenomenon which is what we call the Anglophone crisis, or the crisis in the north or the south. That means what? That means that the citizens of Cameroon who are living in the 2 of the 10 regions, the northwest and southwest, have a problem. They have manifested that they have a problem, and for which the head of state himself, President of the Republic, has said he has understood the pertinence of the problems that have been raised, and that he is determined to go to any length to find a solution. Now, what we know, and we should be able to be honest, is that all Anglophones are not secessionists, unless you want to tell me the contrary, because I know that you are a bona fide Cameroonian who is of integrity. All Anglophones are not secessionists.
There are federalists.
There are federalists. There are some who are unionists, who believe in the decentralized. Some are regionalists. That's fine, but we should not say that this dialogue is not between secessionists and the rest and the state of Cameroon. No, unless you want to say all Anglophones are secessionists. But from what I know, all Anglophones are not secessionists, because I know you are not a secessionist. I know that Cardinal Atumi is not a secessionist. I know that XYZ are not secessionists. But among Anglophones, let us say, honestly, yes, we know that there are secessionists. But we also know that there are others, federalists, unionists, regionalists, and some even who have nothing to, they don't belong to anywhere.
Now, if I understand,
if you want to do dialogue, the dialogue is between the Anglophones of the northwest and southwest and the rest, and the state of Cameroon, of which they are a part. It's good to say.
Dialogue between the Anglophones and the state.
And the state.
Not the government.
No, the government is represented, or is instrumentalized by the state is instrumentalized by the government. The primary instrument of the state in political science is called government. Government is always an instrument, the primary instrument of the state. If you say that I'm seceding as a Cameroonian, what you're saying is that I don't want to be Cameroonian anymore. Well, if you don't want to be Cameroonian anymore, then what you are saying is that you are not willing to be part of a dialogue of Cameroonians, because the dialogue is a dialogue of Cameroonians, by Cameroonians, for Cameroonians, among Cameroonians. So, but guess what? The head of state has said by his own words that the door is not shut on them, on those who are secessionists. The head of state has given only one condition: they should lay down their arms. And if indeed they are secessionists, if they lay down their arms, they will come back to the fold and they can come and talk in the dialogue whether they really believe in secession or not. You see, it's a simple arithmetical or mathematical equation.
Now, within the context of government strategy in solving the Anglophone problem, there are some political leaders who think that the life jail sentence slammed on Sisiku Ayuktabe and the other 9 Anglophone leaders was a blunder that's contributing to aggravate the situation on the ground.
As a citizen and patriotic Cameroonian, I believe in the justice. I believe in our justice system, because you know, when you look at the state has, as I've told you, different shall we say branches or sectoral branches, organic branches. The justice system is not made up of just anybody. You know, these judges that you see, from magistrates courts, appeals courts, and high courts, and so forth, all the way to the Supreme Court and others. These men and women that you see of the justice system, they are men and women of integrity. They are men and women who are very highly educated. They are men and women with a very, with high conscience, great conscience. They are men and women with a sense of the state, and we should not take them for granted that they are doing things. Look, we should respect the justice system and respect the judges.
Highly educated men and women of integrity, but in a system which is said to be under the yoke of the executive arm of the state, which is said to be under the yoke controlled by the executive arm, the President of the Republic, who is the head of the Higher Judicial Council. Yeah,
the system does not make them prisoners.
The Minister of Justice, who is part of the executive,
sure,
giving instructions to
that
the courts.
Is the system. That is the system. But they're operating in a system with their brain.
Was it wise for them to slam the life jail sentence on Sisiku and looking at the context of the Anglophone?
Well, you know, I'm not a judge, and usually things that have to do with justice, I leave it to judges. All I know is that justice has taken its course. They are judges. Justice and has taken its course, and we have to respect the justice system, because justice has taken its course. It is not you and I who will implement and practice the law. There are people who are that are set aside and who do that as a matter of as a mission, as a calling, even as a duty. That's theirs: moral duty, political duty, professional duty. As a matter of conscience, they are doing it, and I believe they are doing it in all good faith, because they are working for the good of this country. They are not working against the good of
But some of those people who are operating in that area, in the judicial system of the country, I'm talking about lawyers of the Cameroon Bar, are going on strike, and they are protesting against the violation of human rights and the rights of detainees like Sisiku Ayuktabe, Professor Maurice Kamto, and all the other political leaders and inmates in general in prison, that their rights are being violated, and they're going to strike for that.
Well, you know, I mean, first of all, the lawyers are a category in society, in all societies, who are in the liberal profession, where they are doing their job as an association of liberal men and women of the law. They understand what their limits are. They understand the scope of their activities, and I think they are doing their job. But no matter how much they are, I mean lawyers, no matter how good they may be, no matter how educated and how professionally good they may be, which I don't doubt, they have to understand that wisdom in their profession begins with respect of the state, and that they cannot equate themselves with the state, and that they have to understand that for them to succeed, they have to work with the state. Now, you refer to the inmates in prison. As you know, in all societies, inmates there are laws that pertain to inmates, but inmates, the laws that pertain to them, meaning to give them their rights and their dignity and so forth, do not permit them to carry out what happened in Kondogui the other day, or what happened in Boya, When you go and destroy, and as inmates, anything within the bounds of your detention center, of course you've broken the law, and the law will do its course. That's very normal.
What the lawyers are decrying are things like incommunicado detention of persons, persons who are detained, and the family members, the lawyers are denied access to them, and of course other rights of the detainees that are being violated. Even during the last hearing of the case between Sisiku Ayuktabe and others and the state of Cameroon, they decided within the ambits of the law and their rights that the judge who was handling the matter was not going to give them a fair trial, and so they had the right to say, no, you're not going to sit for our matter. But he kicked that stuff aside and then went ahead to pronounce the verdict. So some of the things that the lawyers are highlighting.
Well, first of all, you have to first admit that the judge is a lawyer, first of all. For you to be a judge, you have to be a lawyer first. And the guy who is a liberal lawyer, meaning on the defense side, is no more or better a lawyer than the judge. And I'm sure if he's honest or she's honest, you also understand that the judge that you in whose court you are is first of all a lawyer. He's trained just like you. So it's good that while you may not agree with him or her, and you're not supposed to agree. That's why naturally in the organization and function of the justice system, there are those who are judges and others who are lawyers. They're not necessarily supposed to agree, and they never agree anyway. They're not supposed to, otherwise that dichotomy will not be there. But the bottom line is there has to be mutual respect. While you disagree, there has to be mutual respect. And don't forget that the judge is judging within the framework of the authority of the state. The lawyer is defending or making the case and the pleadings as within the framework of a liberal profession, which is trying to make a case for the judge to understand and to be able to deliver judgment. It is not the liberal lawyer defending or whatever, advocating, doesn't have the power to impose on the judge. And it doesn't matter who it may be, whether it is Kamto or Siseko or whatever names you call. Justice is justice, doesn't have the color
and the
of
law.
An individual.
Justice
the law is the law.
Justice and
so
the law
it is
is
good
the
for
law.
people to know that the fact that you mention Kamto or you mention Siseko or you mention whatever name you mention, look, justice does not have the color of the name of an individual.
We will take some interviews right now, and when we come back, we'll conclude on the announced national dialogue.
We filed our appeal in conformity with the provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code, and we are within the line. And I must confess to you that we've received the notifications or certificate of appeal in return, equally showing that our appeal was effectively received by the military tribunal. Conditions remain to be the same as provided for by the law, but the financial provision, the financial aspect is onerous. Our clients informed us that upon service of the certificate of appeals, they were informed that they will be paying 5 million for the processing of the files to be forwarded to the appeal court. In fact, this is one of the most onerous conditions of appeal that we've ever had in history. And when you get such conditions, it means that the appeal court or the military tribunal is kind of stopping our clients from going to appeal. The law thus provides for variation of the conditions of appeal, and we are looking forward to using the law. But again, we are disturbed because we are in a system where we've made a lot of overtures at the appeal court following the procedure, the Criminal Procedure Code, and all our efforts were dashed. So we are even afraid that within the 15 days provided for by the law, the Criminal Procedure Code, the conditions for the violation of the appeal might not be met. So we are still being very disturbed for that amount of money that our clients told us that they have to pay as one of the conditions of appeal.
We fully support the efforts of the Cameroon National Bar Association to change these illegal and unjust conditions. Some Anglophone activists who are detainees or prisoners have been further accused and sentenced with regard to the prison riots that occurred on July 22nd and 24th, 2019, after having undergone torture and in many cases without the benefit of legal counsel. Anglophone separatist leaders who were sentenced to life imprisonment on August 20th, 2019 have seen numerous violations of the law during their proceedings, including the very act of their arrest.
We are pleading on the head of state and the government in general to see into the health situation of our Chief Ephraim Inoni, who has been sick in the Kondenge prison for some time now.
Measures should be taken so that he is evacuated from here for more serious medical checkup.
How long shall we live on fear? You know, we should not. We should always try to come up. To fight for ourselves. You know, because all of us depend on this market. But if the traders understand what it means, because I think they should understand very well, so they should know that it is not. It doesn't move us closing our markets and then staying at home. It doesn't generate us any income.
Also register some teachers who are absent, but the remaining one are available. For those who are absent, I say it. I am going to take appropriate measures to punish them. For the parents who continue to keep the children at home, it is time for them to send back those children to school. You know they have lost more than 3 years of their life, and it will not be easy for them.
You're welcome back. Prof, after a meeting between the Prime Minister, Chief Dr. Joseph John Gote, and some conveners of the Anglophone General Conference, we started talking about this earlier. There is a national dialogue that is previewed for the days ahead. We had started talking about dialogue earlier. How do you think this should be organized, a national dialogue?
Well, I tell you, I only read in the papers. I just read in the papers or I watch the news like anybody else. As far as I know, since the Prime Minister went to the Northwest and the Southwest and he made the solemn declarations that he made, and since the President himself has since taking the oath of office for his present mandate, said that dialogue is what is preferred option and that is open to it. As far as I know, dialogue is on the table. That is the President's preferred option, and I think that the President, being the legitimate, legal, constitutional and political head of the state of Cameroon, knows better, and with the government under the leadership of the Prime Minister will put in place the framework that he deems necessary, appropriate, to ensure that this problem is solved through the dialogue option that he himself has announced. But as you know, when a dialogue is conceived or is envisaged, one has to understand that it takes form. But the first thing in conception that all Cameroonians have to understand is that all dialogue has two elements, two components. One is that dialogue is a process. It's first of all a process. It's not a one thing, one day, one place necessarily. Dialogue involves conception, formulation, identification, implementation, certain practical modalities, organizational factors. That's one thing, the process of dialogue, consultations, and so forth and so on. But dialogue is also eventful that there is a place, there is a day, there are tables, and this is, so dialogue is not just eventful. For those who think it's eventful, they only have half of the picture. You must see it as both a process and an event. And we still have to know that the president, that is his preferred policy option. He has not changed
What is more pressing at this time, Prof? What is more pressing, a national dialogue or a dialogue between Anglophones and the state, as you indicated earlier?
But it is a national dialogue when it is between Anglophones. The Anglophones are not from a different nation. The Anglophones are part and parcel of the nation state called Cameroon.
Will it be wise and appropriate, Prof, to bring the Anglophone problem and all other problems affecting different parts of the country to the same table at the same time?
The president, having said that that's his preferred option, I think he knows best. And in his presidential wisdom and his policy wisdom, knows best what that sort of framework will look like and what will enable the problems of the Northwest and Southwest to be solved.
Last word to Cameroonians.
My last word to Cameroonians is that in spite of the problems we've got, we should count ourselves and consider ourselves as lucky people because we live in a state and we are part of a nation in which, first of all, the people are conscious and they're quite aware and they're mature with regard to the vision and the wisdom that our founding fathers had bequeathed to us. Our founding fathers wanted a Cameroon, one family, one nation, multicultural, bilingual. And they knew that you and I, those of us who will be their offsprings, will do better than they did. That's our duty, and we should not betray our founding fathers. We should count ourselves lucky that we have the head of state who is committed to and determined to solve these problems. And he has said, because this is a matter of public record, that he's willing to go to any length to solve the problems. And his preferred option is dialogue.
Thanks, Professor ELVIS NGOLE, former Minister in charge of special duties at the Presidency of the Republic of Cameroon, former Minister of Forestry and Wildlife, coordinator of the CPDM Academy, and of course political scientist, associate professor of political science in the International Relations Institute of Cameroon. Thanks for joining us in this edition of The Insight.
It's always a great pleasure, and at any time that you need our input, we're always available for a conversation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it.